Here are the documents you requested. Please ensure they're processed immediately.
Got it. I'll take care of it right away.
$87,000. That's what Garrett Hayes thought he'd just thrown away when he pulled into the gravel driveway of his new mountain cabin and spotted a stranger's SUV parked like it belonged there. The engine was still warm. Smoke rose from the chimney. His excitement curdled into confusion, then rage. A woman stood on the porch, blonde, barefoot, holding a shotgun with a grip that said she'd used it before. "Get off my property before I call the cops!" she shouted, voice cracking through the quiet mountain air. The smell of fresh paint he never ordered clashed with the aroma of someone's dinner cooking inside his kitchen. Curtains he didn't buy hung in his windows. Garrett held his deed like a shield. She had possession, and in that moment, that mattered more. When the sheriff rolled up 20 minutes later, Garrett expected justice. Instead, he got betrayal. "This here's a civil dispute," the deputy said, scratching his chin. "Y'all need to take it to court." Garrett just got robbed in daylight, and the law helped the thieves. Garrett Hayes wasn't some fool. 52 years old, retired union electrician from Pittsburgh. The kind of man who spent 3 decades climbing frozen utility poles in February just to earn double overtime. He'd fixed the lights in half the neighborhoods in Allegheny County, patched roofs for friends, and saved every dime he could. Not in a coffee can, but it might as well have been. Same mindset, different era. Every penny earned was a promise to himself and his late wife, Helen, that someday he'd trade the noise of city life for mountain silence. He worked hard, paid his dues, and followed every rule in the book. And yet, somehow, doing everything right led him here, standing on someone else's porch, holding proof of ownership that didn't mean a damn thing. 3 years before that nightmare in the mountains, Garrett had already lived through hell once. Helen, his wife of 31 years, lost her fight with cancer. The cruel kind, the one that empties your savings before it empties your soul. By the time she slipped away, their home was quiet, their bank account drained, and Garrett was left staring at her empty coffee mug every morning. But before she passed, she'd taken his hand, bones light as paper, and whispered, "Go live your dream, baby. Don't just exist." Her words became his compass. Every overtime shift, every cold morning on a steel tower was for that promise. He didn't know it yet, but chasing her last wish would lead him straight into a nightmare she never could have imagined. After Helen was gone, Garrett started looking for what she'd told him to find: peace. His daughter, Emily, a social worker with too much heart for her own good, sent him Zillow listings almost every week. His son, Travis, who ran a construction crew, offered to help him fix whatever dream place he found. "Dad, you've worked your whole life," Travis said. "Do something for you." Garrett spent countless nights scrolling through listings, sipping cold coffee at 2 a.m., the hum of insomnia his only company. Then one night, he found it, an A-frame cabin built in the 1970s, sitting on 40 wooded acres deep in the West Virginia hills. The photos were rough: cracked siding, moss creeping up stone steps, a chimney leaning a little too far north. But the view? Endless trees and golden light stretching past the horizon. It looked like freedom. It was listed on a foreclosure auction site, bank-owned. Clear title, sold as is. The price, $87,000. It felt almost too good to be true. He told himself it wasn't luck. It was destiny, Helen's way of nudging him forward. Garrett hired a remote inspector to make sure he wasn't walking into a trap. The man's report came back promising. "Foundation solid," it read. "Roof needs patching, electrical outdated but works. No leaks, no infestations, no nightmares hiding under the floorboards." Garrett paid $300 more for a title search, just to be sure. When the results came in, the paper said it all: no liens, no disputes, no claims. clean as a whistle. A perfect deal, sealed with decades of hard work and faith. He wired the payment the next day, signed the deed, and circled the move-in date on his calendar in red. He thought it was the start of a new life. He didn't know he was buying into a fight for everything he had left. The mountain road to his new property twisted like a snake through pines and fog. He could almost feel Helen in the passenger seat, laughing at the old truck's engine as it groaned up the incline. When the cabin finally came into view, weathered, crooked, but beautiful, his heart swelled. He parked, stepped out, and breathed in the scent of pine and wood smoke. For one glorious second, Garrett believed he'd done it. Then came the realization. Someone else had beaten him there. Fresh tire marks. Curtains fluttering in the window. A dog barking from inside. And that's when the front door creaked open, and the woman with a shotgun stepped out. The dream snapped in two. Garrett froze where he stood, gravel crunching beneath his boots. The woman's shotgun stayed leveled, her eyes bright with anger and fear. "Last warning, mister," she barked, voice sharp as broken glass. He raised the deed high, hands trembling with disbelief. "Ma'am, I bought this property. Paid for it fair and square." She didn't even glance at the paper. "You step 1 foot closer, I'll take your kneecaps off." Behind her, a dog barked from the living room window, her living room. The place he dreamed of restoring had been hijacked before he'd ever set foot inside. The smell of someone else's cooking drifted through the open door, heavy with garlic and betrayal. Garrett felt the burn rise in his chest, not from fear, but fury. This wasn't just theft. This was trespassing wrapped in confidence, and somehow he was the intruder. When the sheriff finally showed up, Garrett thought logic would prevail. He handed over the deed, the title, the receipts, everything. The officer took one long look, then turned toward the woman. "You say you live here?" She nodded. "Been here 3 months." That was enough. "Sir, this looks like a civil dispute," the sheriff said flatly. "Ain't nothing I can do right now." Garrett blinked. "Civil dispute? That's my name on the damn deed." The sheriff sighed, already bored. "You'll need to take it up in court. Squatter laws and all." The words hit like a slap. He wasn't just losing property. He was losing justice in real time. As the cruiser pulled away, the woman smirked from the porch. She'd stolen his home, and the law had just handed her the keys. He drove aimlessly down the mountain road, headlights cutting through mist and shame. The deed lay on the passenger seat, mocking him with its useless perfection. All those years climbing icy poles, fixing other people's power, and now he couldn't even claim his own roof. Every mile felt heavier, every breath tighter. He pulled over by a creek and sat there, listening to the water rush by like time slipping through his fingers. Garrett wasn't a man who cried easily, but that night he did. The dream he'd built with sweat and sacrifice had been stolen before it began, and the people sworn to protect him had looked the other way. The next morning, Garrett drove into the nearest town and found a corner booth at a diner with Wi-Fi and weak coffee. He opened his laptop and started digging. Hours bled into days as he read about squatter laws, adverse possession, and property loopholes that turn theft into legality. Turns out, if someone occupies a property long enough, even illegally, the courts can give them rights stronger than a deed in hand. The realization made his stomach twist. He wasn't fighting a thief. He was fighting a system built to ignore him. But he'd spent decades troubleshooting electrical grids. He knew how to find faults and expose them. Garrett started tracing every line of the sale. The auction company, the bank, the title service, every email, every receipt. That's when things started to smell wrong. The listing company had dissolved 2 months before the sale. The so-called inspector's phone was disconnected. Even the title search came from a company registered out of a P.O. box in Nevada. Every layer he peeled back revealed another lie. The cabin hadn't been bank-owned in years. It was entangled in an unresolved estate dispute. He hadn't bought a property. He'd bought into a trap. Someone knew exactly what they were selling, and they knew someone like Garrett wouldn't see it coming. When Emily found out, she drove straight to him, eyes red and jaw tight. "Dad, you have to fight this. You can't just let them take it." Travis joined the next day, toolbox in hand and fury in his voice. "We'll camp outside if we have to. Nobody's taking your place." For the first time since Helen's death, the house filled with family again, not the one he bought, but the one that mattered. Together, they drafted letters, printed documents, called county offices. Garrett didn't sleep much, but for the first time, exhaustion felt like purpose. He'd been knocked down before. This time, he was standing back up with help. The courthouse in Fayette County smelled like mildew and old paper. Garrett waited hours just to speak to a clerk who treated him like a nuisance. When he finally got to file his claim, the man behind the glass said, "It could take 6 months to get a hearing." 6 months. That woman could live in his cabin, paint the walls, even rent it out, and the system would let her. Garrett clenched his jaw and signed the forms anyway. He wasn't letting her win by delay. He'd waited years for retirement. He could wait a little longer for justice. Word spread fast in small towns. By week's end, everyone at the diner knew about the Pittsburgh guy who got scammed out of his mountain cabin. Some pitied him, some snickered, and a few offered advice that ranged from "burn it down" to "get a better lawyer." But one old man at the counter leaned over his coffee and said, "Son, you want to win? Don't fight the woman. Fight the paperwork." That stuck. Garrett realized the only thing stronger than the law was the proof the law couldn't ignore. Digging deeper, Garrett uncovered something wild. A second deed, filed months before his purchase, listing the woman's name as a caretaker occupant. It wasn't legal ownership, but it was enough for possession rights under squatter protection laws. Whoever set up the sale had planned this. They'd found an old loophole that let someone plant a caretaker just long enough to stall any rightful owner. Garrett knew then that this wasn't just bad luck, it was a scam. And he'd walked right into it. Garrett's electrician instincts kicked in. Fix what's broken by tracing the current backward. He filed for discovery, subpoenaed the auction company's records, and when the judge finally granted it, the whole con unraveled. The fake inspector, the title company, the caretaker, all linked to one LLC managed by the same two names. A husband and wife team running foreclosure scams across multiple states. The same couple who'd sold him the cabin had been indicted before for fraud. The sheriff who dismissed him? Turns out, his brother-in-law worked for them. 2 months later, federal agents rolled into Fayette County. Garrett stood at the bottom of the driveway, watching as black SUVs surrounded the cabin. The woman came out screaming, but this time, no one listened. They found forged documents, laundered money, and records from over a dozen fake sales. Garrett wasn't just a victim anymore. He was the witness who broke the case. When the lead agent shook his hand, she said, "You just saved a lot of people, Mr. Hayes." For the first time in a long time, he believed her. When the case hit court, the fraudsters pleaded guilty. The woman posing as owner testified for leniency, claiming she was promised a cut. Garrett didn't look at her once. When the judge ruled, his voice was clear. "Property restored to Mr. Garrett Hayes. Damages awarded." Garrett exhaled, the kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding for months. Justice, slow and heavy, had finally arrived. When he drove back up that ridge for the first time as rightful owner, the forest greeted him with silence. The cabin was a wreck, trashed floors, shattered windows, vandalized walls. But to him, it was beautiful. It was his again. He spent weeks repairing it, new wiring, fresh boards, roof patched by his own hands. Every nail driven felt like reclaiming a piece of his life. The place Helen told him to find finally existed, not as a dream, but as proof that persistence wins. Garrett Hayes spent 30 years keeping the lights on for strangers and nearly lost everything chasing one promise: to live, not just exist. They stole his home, his savings, and almost his faith, but he fought back and won. If someone walked into your life and claimed what you built, what would you do? Would you walk away, or would you fight until the truth burned through the lies? Garrett did. And now, every sunset over that West Virginia ridge reminds him, some dreams are worth bleeding for, especially when the world tries to steal them in broad daylight.